Okay, so this is the next video for this will be part 2, number 5, or part 5, part 2. The title's a little confusing. Anyway, so I'm going to continue from where I left off in the previous video. So let's begin. There was a tiny clearing, no more than the space 2 or 3 trees would need, beside the stream just ahead of him, and there he saw his daughter, smiling in her sleep, with her head in the lap of a young man. He was looking down at her when Gilvin first saw them, but something caused him to look up, and their eyes met. Gilvin knew at once what sort of a creature it was whose eyes met his. For a moment he stopped breathing, and he felt that his pulse paused in his veins. His hair stopped growing, and he had no sense of the ground pressing against the bottom of his feet, or the sunlight on his shoulders. This was nothing like the sensation he had had once out hunting, when his horse put its foot in a hole and threw him, and he, dazed and full length on the ground, found that the boar they were chasing had turned and was grinning at him, the foam dripping from its mouth. It was nothing like the feeling he'd had when Alora smiled at him the first time either, or when he had been alone with his daughter and seen her take her first steps without assistance, or when he was 16 years old and his favorite godfather died. What he felt now was nothing like any of these, and yet it was those things that he remembered. He came back from wherever he was and looked again at this young man, only this time he looked beyond the stillness, the pause of time that Gilvin had felt within himself, that had told him what he knew, and he saw the love and tenderness this young man felt for Linnadel that he, Gilvin, had interrupted with his presence. And beyond that, he saw a flicker of something else. Something Gilvin saw was utterly new and strange to this young man. Fear. This fear was the oldest fear of mankind, that the present does not last, and with that flicker of fear, the stillness wavered too, and a little sense of time, of the passage of days and years, slipped into the gap and settled on the young man's face, and Gilvin found himself thinking, this boy is only a few years older than Linnadel. Then Gilvin understood what this meant, and his awful sympathy for someone first learning of time started his breath again, and his heart, and once again he knew the sunlight was warm. The young man, still deep in his new knowledge, saw the sympathy, though he did not yet understand it, and he made his beloved's father a shaky smile, and Gilvin took a step forward. That step made no sound, yet Linnadel was awake at once and flew to her father, and they hugged each other till they could hardly breathe. When Gilvin looked up again, the young man stood a few steps away, hesitating, and Gilvin gave him a real smile, and, letting his daughter just a little bit loose from the grip in which he still held her, offered his hand. This is Donathor, said Linnadel to her father's rough shirt front, and Donathor took the hand, and Gilvin truly meant the welcome, for Linnadel's heart beat as it always had, and yet a little more warmly, and her voice was as clear as it had always been, but there was a new undercurrent of joy in every word. Gilvin, her father, relaxed and was happy in this present moment that had found him his lost daughter. Gilvin, the lover, remembered Alora's first smile to him and heard its echo in Linnadel's pronouncing the name Donathor, as he had seen it in the young man's eyes just a little while before. And for this, too, he was glad for the present, a trembling, precarious, yet peaceful bit of time, because it had saddened him no less than Alora that Linnadel should face her life alone and be resigned to it. Linnadel, breathed a voice, and she flung herself from her father's arms, only to turn to her mother's. Alora smiled at Donathor, and there was understanding in her eyes, but no constraint, and Gilvin thought ruefully that if she had found them first, she would have felt no difficulty at all. How easily we welcome her back, he thought, watching his wife's and daughter's faces, and thinking how much they were alike, and how little. We hadn't lived with our grief long enough to believe in it. We were sure we could find her and bring her back. He looked again at Donathor and found him watching Elora with a slightly puzzled expression on his face, as if he groped for a recollection he could not quite grasp. Puzzled, thought Gilvin, puzzled in his turn. "There'll be tea by the time we go back," said Elora, as if the four of them had been for a quiet walk before breakfast and were returning to the palace. "And there are plenty of sandwiches left." Lonadel thought of the fruit tree that had provided them their supper the night before, and she looked around for it, but it was not there. The rocks that parted the water of the stream lay in different places than she remembered them from the evening before, and the trees around her were not the same trees. She shivered a little and knew that she had come home. Then she remembered that it was no longer home, and she hung her head, pretending to gaze at a squirrel that was sitting at the foot of a tree very near them, debating within itself if it dared dash by them. But her parents saw the change of mood in her, and their happiness faltered without their knowing why, and then, before she opened her mouth to begin to explain, they did know why. And their sigh was the sigh of the people who had held the golden ribbons. Donathor stood a little apart from them, the parents and their only child, but she felt his awareness of her and the strength he tried to offer her through the soft, sweet air of that small clearing, and her courage returned, although her sorrow was not lessened by it. She raised her head and looked at her father and mother in turn, and she knew that they knew already what she was about to say, but that still they waited for her to say it. "I cannot stay here," she said. "Donathor and I are going away, as far away as we can, till we find a country like neither of those we are leaving. And we know we may not find such a land, but we are doomed to the search. We cannot stay here, as we could not stay in his parents' land." As she spoke, she looked beyond those she spoke to, at the strange tree that stood where the fruit-laden tree had been, and she wondered again how such things as boundaries were arranged. And she heard her own words, "We cannot stay," and even as she said them, she cringed away from them, although she knew she had no choice but to do as she had said they must. And she saw little glints of sunlight through the green leaves of that tree, and she seemed to see the branches bend a little lower, and phantom yellow globes of fruit hanging from them. The trees murmured together as friends will as they make room for one another, and are joined by those who have been absent. And through this shifting, swaying, half-seen wood, she glimpsed something else, a tall hedge pierced with arches so tall that the tallest king in his stateliest crown could pass through any without bending his head. And the arches were outlined with flowers. She was not sure of the hedge because she was not sure of the impossible trees and the transparent fruit, but then she noticed one arch in particular, and was certain that the flowers around it were violet, with stems of lapis lazuli, and she saw people approaching that arch and passing through it, coming toward herself and Donathor and her parents, and of them she was sure beyond doubt. She and Donathor had left them only yesterday. Elora and Gilvin saw them too. Gilvin took his hands out of his pockets. The royal tailors needn't really have worried, except for their own pride of craft. Gilvin looked like a king, even when he should have looked like a woodcutter with baggy pants, as Laura could only be a queen, even in a partridge-colored dress and heavy boots. "Wait," said the king who approached them, for he was no less obviously a king than Gilvin. "Wait, we shall not lose our children so, and you will help us." His queen had stopped. His queen had suddenly stopped and stood staring, as humble and innocent as a lost child. Gilvin felt, rather than saw, Elora take a step forward, and he almost did not recognize her voice as she said, "Elian." And the fairy queen burst into tears and ran to put her arms around her long-lost sister. And I think that's a good place to stop for this video. Thank you if you're listening. Let me know if you have any questions or any concerns, or just let me know if you like this book or anything about the way I read, or just whatever. You can talk to me in the comments. I feel like I don't really know what to say in my intros. I have a bit more to say in my outros, but In my intros, I'm not quite sure what to say. Yeah, that's all for today. And hopefully I can do better at posting on especially Mondays. But it's a little bit difficult trying to find a quiet time. Because like right now I'm recording this at 2 o'clock in the morning because everyone is asleep and it's quiet. Well, the heater came on, so it got a little noisy, but I'm probably speaking really fast. But bear with me while I find a better time or make more time to record these. Thank you again for listening. Take care. Bye.